The deepest part of the Pacific Ocean lies nearly 7 miles below the surface. No sunlight has ever reached it. Water presses down with a force that would crush most materials. Temperatures remain just above freezing, unchanged, constant, indifferent to anything above. For a long time, this was considered a boundary, a place where complexity ends, a place where movement should not exist. When instruments first reached the bottom, they did not arrive easily. Some failed before getting close. Others returned with partial data, fragments of a place that resisted observation. Then something appeared, a shape crossing the seafloor, slow, soft, not fixed to the ground. More followed, forms drifting through the darkness, bodies that looked too delicate for the pressure around them, edges that blurred into the water itself. Some were nearly transparent, some carried faint light within their own bodies, others moved so slowly they almost disappeared between frames. They were not singular, they formed patterns. Creatures repeated certain shapes, certain movements, certain ways of existing without relying on anything familiar from the surface. No plants, no sunlight, no clear beginning of energy, just a continuation. And with each descent, the pattern expanded, not more aggressive, not more chaotic, just further from expectation. Machines continued to struggle to reach these depths. Metal bends, systems fail, communication delays stretch into uncertainty, access remains limited. Even now, many encounters happen only once, a brief recording, a single pass of a camera, then nothing again, as if the place does not repeat itself easily, and yet something persists there, a kind of life that does not rely on light, a structure that holds together under pressure that should erase it, an ecosystem built without the conditions most life depends on. This is real. The deeper the observation goes, the less familiar the answers become. So what kind of life continues in a place like this? This is the world of the deepest parts of the Pacific Ocean, where existence follows rules that feel almost separate from the surface. Now let's move slowly downward into that depth. Numbers begin to lose their meaning at a certain scale. Depth becomes less of a measurement and more of a separation, a gradual leaving behind of everything familiar above. The surface recedes not only in distance but in influence, until what remains feels detached from the rest of the world. If the highest point on land were turned downward and placed into the ocean, its summit would still fail to reach the deepest floor. Mount Everest rises nearly 9 kilometers into the sky, yet parts of the Pacific descend even further, extending beyond 10 kilometers into darkness. It is not simply deep, it is an inversion of scale, where the lowest point exceeds the highest peak, as if the planet itself folds inward more than it rises outward. With depth comes pressure, and pressure reshapes everything. At sea level, the air rests lightly against the body, unnoticed and constant. Far below, water gathers in immense weight, layer upon layer pressing downward without pause. Each 10 meters adds another atmosphere of force. By the time the seafloor is reached, that force becomes almost incomprehensible, more than 1,000 times what is experienced at the surface. It is not a sudden crushing, but a continuous, unyielding presence that leaves no space untouched. Solid structures that feel permanent above begin to fail under such conditions. Metals can deform, seals weaken, and even the smallest imperfection becomes a point of collapse. The environment does not resist with violence, but with persistence. Pressure here is not an event, it is a constant state, shaping every form that remains within it. Light, which defines so much of the surface world, fades long before these depths are reached. Sunlight enters the ocean in abundance, scattering into blues and greens as it travels downward. Yet with each passing layer, it weakens, absorbed and redirected, until only the faintest traces remain. At a few hundred meters, colors begin to disappear. Reds vanish first, followed by oranges and yellows, leaving a narrowing spectrum behind. Deeper still, the last fragments of blue dissolve into the surrounding water. Beyond that point, no sunlight continues. The transition is complete, and darkness is not an absence, but a stable condition. It does not flicker or shift with time of day. It does not respond to seasons or weather. It remains steady and absolute. Temperature follows its own quiet descent. Near the surface, warmth is carried by sunlight and movement, shaped by winds and currents. Far below, those influences fade, replaced by a cold that changes very little. Just above freezing, the water settles into a narrow range, neither rising nor falling in any meaningful way. It is a stillness of temperature, as constant as the darkness itself. Taken together, these conditions form an environment that appears incompatible with complexity. No light to support photosynthesis, pressure that challenges the integrity of physical structures, cold that slows chemical processes, distance that isolates completely from surface cycles. Each factor alone presents a barrier, but combined, they suggest a boundary where activity should diminish into absence. Yet the seafloor remains, not as a barren expanse, but as a place where existence continues under different terms. The absence of sunlight does not end energy, it redirects it. The pressure does not eliminate structure, it refines it. The cold does not stop motion, it slows it into new patterns. What appears hostile from above becomes, at depth, a stable system, not welcoming, not forgiving, but consistent. And within that consistency, forms emerge that align with the conditions rather than resist them. Depth, then, is not simply distance from the surface. It is a transition into a different set of rules, where familiar limits dissolve and are replaced by quieter, more enduring constraints. The recording did not begin with clarity. It opened in a field of grain and shifting noise, as if the camera itself was uncertain of where it had arrived. Light from the submersible spread outward in a narrow cone, dissolving quickly into the surrounding dark, revealing only fragments of the seafloor at a time. Sediment drifted slowly through the beam, each particle moving with a patience that made time feel stretched and uneven. For a while, nothing interrupted that stillness. The lens captured texture rather than activity, soft planes of fine material, marked only by faint impressions that could not be easily traced. Instruments continued their quiet work, relaying pressure, temperature, and position, each reading confirming that the descent had reached a depth once considered beyond meaningful observation. Then, almost at the edge of visibility, something shifted. It did not enter dramatically. It emerged gradually, a pale form crossing into the light, with no sudden motion, as though it had always been there and had only now become visible. Its outline was difficult to fix, its body soft, lacking the rigid structure expected of animals known from shallower waters. It moved without urgency, gliding just above the seafloor, its presence defined more by change than by form. The recording captured only a few moments of this passage. The creature did not react to the light in any visible way. It did not accelerate or retreat. It continued along its path with a steady, unbroken motion, as if the environment imposed no disturbance upon it. Then, as quietly as it had appeared, it faded beyond the illuminated field, returning to a darkness that offered no further detail. Above, the response unfolded more slowly. Those watching the feed did not immediately assign meaning to what they had seen. The image was replayed, examined frame by frame, its details magnified and reduced again, searching for confirmation that the movement was not an artifact of the equipment. Early deep-sea footage had often been uncertain, shaped by interference, distortion, and the limits of transmission from such depths. But the motion held. It remained consistent across each frame, following a path that could not be explained by drifting debris or shifting currents. The form maintained continuity, its edges soft but coherent, its progression deliberate. What had been recorded was not random, it was structured, persistent, and alive. This recognition did not arrive as a sudden conclusion, but as a gradual alignment of observations. Data from the instruments confirmed the depth. The pressure readings matched the expected values of the trench. The camera's orientation remained stable. There was no indication that the system had misreported its position. What had been seen existed at that depth. The implications settled quietly. For a long time, such regions had been treated as thresholds, where complexity diminished, where life, if present at all, would exist only in the simplest possible forms. Movement, especially controlled and sustained, suggested a level of organization that extended beyond those assumptions. The footage did not reveal the full nature of the organism. It offered no clear classification, no immediate placement within known groups, yet it established something more fundamental. It showed that life at these depths was not limited to static existence. It could move, navigate, and maintain structure within conditions once thought to prevent such behavior. Subsequent descents would record more encounters, each adding fragments to a growing pattern. Different shapes appeared, some more defined, others even more elusive, but all sharing a similar quiet persistence. The initial recording remained distinct, not because it was the most detailed, but because it marked a shift in expectation. What had once been considered unlikely became observable. The boundary between absence and presence softened, replaced by a recognition that life could extend further than previously understood, adapting not by resisting the environment, but by aligning with it in ways that remained subtle and largely unseen. The camera, in that early moment, had not only captured an organism, it had revealed a possibility, one that would continue to unfold with each careful descent into the depths. There is a form that does not seem built for endurance, yet it remains where endurance is most tested. It does not announce itself through speed or structure. It appears instead as something gently held together, a body that seems closer to fluid than to solidity, drifting just above the seafloor with a quiet steadiness. This is the snailfish, among the deepest living fish ever recorded, existing at depths that approach the lower limits of vertebrate life. Its presence is not marked by strength in the conventional sense. Its body lacks the firm musculature and rigid support seen in many shallow water species. Instead, it is soft, almost gelatinous, shaped in a way that seems to yield rather than resist. Its skin carries a faint translucence, allowing hints of internal structure to show through. Fins extend lightly from its sides, not designed for rapid propulsion, but for subtle adjustments, guiding its movement with minimal effort. It does not dart or chase. It hovers, shifts, and glides, its motion defined by restraint rather than urgency. At first glance, such a form appears unsuited to the immense pressures of its environment. There are no thick shells, no reinforced exteriors, no obvious signs of protection. Yet this softness is not a weakness. It is an alignment with the conditions surrounding it. Without rigid cavities or compressible air spaces, there is little within the body that can collapse. Pressure passes through it evenly, meeting no resistance that would cause structural failure. Within its cells, a different kind of adaptation unfolds, one that cannot be seen directly, but defines its ability to persist. The snailfish carries high concentrations of small organic compounds known as osmolytes, molecules that stabilize proteins under extreme pressure. Among these is trimethylamine N-oxide, a substance that helps maintain the proper folding of cellular structures, preventing them from deforming in the dense weight of the surrounding water. As depth increases, so does the concentration of these compounds. It is a gradual adjustment, a chemical balancing that allows the fish's internal systems to continue functioning where most others would fail. There is, however, a limit to this strategy. Beyond certain depths, the accumulation of such molecules begins to interfere with basic biological processes, placing a boundary on how far vertebrate life can extend. The snailfish exists close to that boundary, not exceeding it, but resting near its edge. Its feeding behavior reflects the scarcity of its environment. Small invertebrates drifting or resting along the seafloor become its primary source of energy. It does not rely on bursts of speed or complex hunting strategies. Instead, it moves with quiet precision, conserving energy, taking opportunities as they arise. Its mouth opens gently, drawing in what is available, then closing without disturbance. Reproduction follows a similarly measured pattern. Eggs are often laid in protected spaces, sometimes within the structures of other deep-sea organisms, where they remain shielded during development. Growth is slow, shaped by the limited resources of the surrounding world. Time stretches differently here, and the life cycle adjusts accordingly. There is no excess in its design. Every aspect of the snailfish reflects a reduction to what is necessary, a form that persists not through dominance, but through compatibility. Where pressure intensifies and options narrow, it continues, not by overcoming the environment, but by existing within its constraints so completely that resistance becomes unnecessary. In its quiet movement and delicate structure, the snailfish embodies a threshold, a point where life approaches the limits of what its chemistry can support. It does not appear extraordinary in isolation, yet its presence at such depths carries a significance that extends beyond its form. It remains there, close to the boundary, sustained by a balance so precise that even slight changes would shift its ability to exist. A quiet rhythm moves through the water, not driven by urgency, but by a steady, almost weightless cadence. Two rounded fins rise and fall from the sides of a small, soft body, their motion slow and deliberate, resembling a gentle pulse rather than a forceful stroke. Each movement carries the animal forward with minimal disturbance, as if it were part of the water's own drift. This is the Dumbo octopus, a deep-sea cephalopod found at depths where few others of its kind remain. Its form is compact, its mantle smooth and slightly translucent, its arms extending outward in a loose web that gathers the surrounding water. Unlike the quick, jet-driven movements of shallow relatives, it does not rely on bursts of propulsion. Instead, it moves through a continuous, gliding motion, guided by the soft undulation of its fins. Those fins, set high on the body, define its presence. They open and close with a steady rhythm, creating lift as much as forward motion, allowing the octopus to hover with precision. There is no sharp acceleration, no sudden change in direction. Movement unfolds gradually, each adjustment blending into the next, maintaining a balance that keeps it suspended just above the seafloor. Its environment offers little in the way of immediate energy, so efficiency becomes essential. The Dumbo octopus conserves its strength through this measured style of locomotion, reducing the need for constant exertion. Water passes smoothly along its body, encountering no rigid edges or unnecessary resistance. It exists in a state that appears almost effortless, though each motion is finely tuned to the conditions around it. Feeding follows a similar pattern of quiet precision. As it drifts, its arms extend slightly, sensing the presence of small organisms along the sediment below. Tiny crustaceans, worms, and other invertebrates form the basis of its diet, scattered sparsely across the seafloor. When contact is made, the web between its arms encloses the prey in a gentle folding motion, drawing it inward without struggle. Unlike many octopuses, it does not tear or manipulate its food extensively. The prey is brought directly to the mouth, where it is consumed whole. This approach minimizes energy use, aligning with the limited availability of food in its surroundings. Each successful capture becomes part of a slow, ongoing process rather than a rapid series of events. Its body reflects this same principle of balance. The tissues remain soft, lacking the dense musculature seen in faster-moving species. There are no structures that would compress under pressure, no internal spaces that would require reinforcement. The entire form yields slightly to the surrounding force, maintaining integrity through flexibility rather than resistance. Reproduction occurs without the need for a specific season. Eggs develop within the female over extended periods, each one maturing at its own pace. When released, they are already well formed, capable of entering the environment without a vulnerable larval stage. This continuous cycle allows the species to persist in a place where encounters between individuals are infrequent. In its movement, there is no sign of haste. The Dumbo octopus drifts, pauses, and adjusts, remaining in quiet alignment with the conditions that surround it. It does not dominate its environment or reshape it. Instead, it follows its contours, responding to subtle variations in current and terrain with movements that remain smooth and unbroken. The shape of its fins rises and falls, again and again, maintaining a rhythm that continues without interruption. Within that rhythm, the animal remains suspended, neither fully still nor fully in motion, existing in a space where effort and stillness merge into a single, continuous flow. A single point of light appears where no external light can reach, not reflected, not borrowed, but created within the body itself. It does not illuminate a wide space. It remains small, contained, suspended just ahead of a waiting form that holds still in the surrounding dark. This faint glow belongs to the anglerfish, a creature shaped by absence rather than abundance. Its body is compact, often darkened to blend into its surroundings, with a wide mouth that curves forward, lined with slender teeth that angle inward. These teeth do not rely on force alone. Their shape ensures that once something passes between them, retreat becomes unlikely. Extending from the head is a modified fin ray, a delicate structure that rises outward and ends in a soft, luminous tip. This is the lure, a living extension that produces light through a symbiotic relationship with bioluminescent bacteria. Within this small organ, chemical reactions generate a steady glow, powered not by sunlight, but by the exchange of compounds between host and microbe. The light does not remain fixed. It can pulse, brighten, or dim, shifting in subtle patterns that resemble the movements of small organisms. In a place where vision depends on the faintest signals, this illusion becomes a point of focus. The surrounding darkness carries little information, so even a slight change draws attention. The anglerfish does not move far to find its prey. It waits, suspended or resting close to the seafloor, conserving energy in a world where food arrives unpredictably. The lure extends forward, drifting with small adjustments, maintaining its position within the limited field where another creature might notice. When something approaches, drawn by the soft glow, the anglerfish remains still until the final moment. Then, with a rapid motion, its jaws open wide, creating a sudden intake of water that pulls the prey inward. The action is brief and precise, a single movement that must succeed, as opportunities are not frequent. Encounters with this species remain rare, not because it is entirely absent, but because of the vastness of its habitat and the stillness of its behavior. Cameras pass through its environment without always detecting it. Even when present, it may remain motionless, its dark body merging with the background, its lure the only visible sign of life. Its form reflects a long adaptation to scarcity. The body can expand to accommodate prey larger than expected, allowing it to take advantage of rare encounters with substantial food. Metabolism remains slow, reducing the need for constant feeding. Energy is stored and used carefully, extending the time between meals. Reproduction introduces another unusual pattern. In some species, males are significantly smaller, existing primarily to locate a female in the vastness of the deep. Once found, the male attaches to her body, gradually fusing with her tissues, becoming a permanent source of reproductive cells. This union reduces the challenge of future encounters, ensuring that reproduction can occur whenever conditions allow. The luminous lure continues its quiet motion, an isolated point of light in a space that offers little else. It does not illuminate the surroundings in any broad sense. It exists as a signal, precise and contained, shaped by the needs of a hunter that cannot afford to search widely. Within this arrangement, the anglerfish maintains its presence. It does not rely on speed or strength in the traditional sense. Instead, it uses patience, subtlety, and a controlled display of light, aligning its behavior with the limitations of its environment. The glow persists, steady and contained, marking a presence that remains largely unseen, yet continues within the depth where light is otherwise absent. Light returns here, not from above, but from within the living forms themselves. It appears in scattered points, brief signals, and slow pulses that emerge and fade without altering the surrounding darkness. Each glow exists on its own terms, small and contained, yet together they create a shifting pattern that belongs entirely to this depth. This phenomenon, known as bioluminescence, arises from chemical reactions inside specialized cells. Certain molecules release energy in the form of light when they interact, often involving a compound called luciferin and an enzyme that accelerates the reaction. The result is a cold light, one that produces no heat, allowing it to exist without disturbing the delicate balance of the organism that generates it. In these depths, light becomes a tool rather than a constant. Many creatures produce it because it serves multiple purposes, each shaped by the conditions of their environment. Without sunlight, visibility depends on what can be created internally. The ability to generate light offers a way to interact with surroundings that would otherwise remain entirely obscured. Some species use bioluminescence as a form of communication. Patterns of light, flickering in specific rhythms, pass between individuals of the same kind. These signals do not travel far, but they are precise, allowing recognition in a space where other senses provide limited information. The timing, intensity, and duration of each pulse carry meaning, forming a quiet exchange that unfolds without sound. Others use light to attract. Small organisms drifting through the water respond to changes in brightness, moving toward what appears to be a potential source of food. The glow becomes a point of focus, guiding them closer until distance collapses and the encounter becomes final. In this way, light functions as an extension of the body, reaching outward into the surrounding dark. There are also forms of defense that rely on illumination. Some creatures release sudden flashes when disturbed, creating a brief confusion that disrupts the approach of a predator. Others emit clouds of glowing particles, drifting away like a temporary veil, redirecting attention while the organism moves in another direction. These displays do not last long, but they create enough separation to allow escape. A different strategy appears in counter-illumination, where light is produced along the underside of the body. By matching the faint glow that filters down from above, even at great depths, the organism reduces its silhouette when viewed from below. This subtle adjustment makes it less visible, blending it into the limited light that still exists in higher layers. Across this environment, bioluminescence is not rare. It is widespread, appearing in fish, crustaceans, jelly-like organisms, and even certain bacteria that live in association with larger hosts. The ocean at these depths does not remain entirely dark. It carries a quiet, intermittent brightness, a network of signals that appear and disappear without warning. These lights do not combine into a continuous glow. They remain separate, each one emerging for its own purpose, then fading back into the surrounding water. The result is a landscape defined by moments rather than permanence, where illumination exists only when it is needed. In this system, energy is used with precision. Producing light requires resources, and those resources are limited. Each flash, each pulse, each sustained glow reflects a balance between cost and benefit. Nothing is wasted, and nothing continues without reason. The water itself remains unchanged, still and dark, yet within it, these points of light continue to appear. They move, pause, and vanish, forming patterns that never fully repeat, yet persist as part of the living structure of this depth. What emerges is not a bright world, but one where light exists in fragments, each one created by life, each one carrying a purpose that aligns with the quiet demands of its surroundings. At certain angles, there is nothing to see, even when something is present. The water appears uninterrupted, a clear passage without form, yet within it, bodies move that leave almost no visual trace. Their presence is revealed only when light catches the slightest boundary, a faint outline that forms and dissolves within a moment. These are the transparent inhabitants of the deep, organisms whose structures are built with minimal pigmentation and reduced opacity. Their tissues allow light to pass through rather than reflect it, making them difficult to distinguish from the surrounding water. In an environment where visibility is already limited, this near invisibility becomes an effective way of existing without drawing attention. Their bodies often take on soft, gelatinous forms, composed largely of water held together by delicate networks of proteins. This composition reduces density differences between the organism and the water around it, further diminishing contrast. There are no bold colors, no sharp markings, no features that stand apart clearly. Instead, their shapes remain subtle, shifting slightly as they move, blending into the medium that supports them. Internal structures are present but faint. Organs appear as gentle shadows within the body, sometimes visible only when illuminated directly. The outline of a digestive tract, the suggestion of a central axis, these details emerge briefly, then fade again as the angle changes. Even movement can be difficult to track, as there is little surface detail to follow. Invisibility offers a quiet advantage. Predators that rely on sight encounter fewer clear targets, while prey remains unaware of what approaches. The absence of pigmentation reduces the chance of being detected, especially in a place where light is scarce and visual signals are already weakened. By not standing out, these organisms reduce the likelihood of interaction altogether. Some species extend this strategy further by aligning their bodies with the faint light that may still filter from above, adjusting their orientation to minimize any visible silhouette. Others remain within layers of water where scattered light and particulate matter create a complex visual background, further obscuring their presence. In each case, the goal is not to hide behind structures, but to become indistinguishable from the space itself. Movement remains slow and controlled. Pulsing contractions pass through their bodies, propelling them gently forward or allowing them to hover in place. The motion is continuous but restrained, avoiding sudden changes that might create detectable disturbances. Water flows through and around them with minimal disruption, maintaining the illusion that nothing is there. Capturing these organisms on camera presents its own challenges. Standard imaging relies on contrast, on the difference between subject and background. When that difference is reduced, detection becomes uncertain. A lens may pass directly by a transparent body without registering it, or record only a faint distortion that is difficult to interpret. Specialized lighting can reveal more detail, but it also alters the natural appearance of the organism, introducing reflections and shadows that do not exist under normal conditions. Even then, parts of the body may remain invisible, blending seamlessly into the water. What is recorded often feels incomplete, a partial glimpse of a form that cannot be fully defined. Despite these difficulties, their presence is consistent. They drift, pulse, and adjust within the water column, maintaining a form of life that relies on subtlety rather than visibility. Their design reflects a balance between structure and transparency, enough to function, yet minimal enough to remain unseen. Within this quiet arrangement, they continue, not marked by color or contrast, but by the absence of both, existing as shapes that are only briefly revealed before returning to near invisibility. It occupies a layer where the water itself carries less breath, a region known for its scarcity rather than its abundance. Here, dissolved oxygen falls to levels that challenge most forms of active life, creating a zone where movement slows and presence becomes sparse. Within this quiet constraint, a small cephalopod continues, suspended in a balance that favors endurance over speed. The vampire squid drifts through this environment with a restrained motion, its body neither rushing nor still. Its mantle is dark, often appearing almost black, yet under certain conditions it reflects deep shades of red, a color that becomes nearly invisible in the limited light that reaches these depths. Its arms extend outward, connected by a web of soft tissue that forms a cloak-like structure around its body. Despite its name, it does not feed on blood, nor does it pursue large prey. The title arose from early impressions of its appearance, particularly the way it can draw its webbed arms over itself, creating a shape that seemed unfamiliar and intense. In reality, its behavior remains measured, shaped by the conditions of its environment rather than any form of aggression. Oxygen minimum zones impose a strict limit on activity. In these regions, the concentration of oxygen in the water drops to levels that cannot sustain rapid movement or high metabolic demand. The vampire squid adapts by reducing its energy use to a minimum. Its metabolism operates slowly, conserving resources and allowing it to persist where others cannot maintain their internal processes. Its circulatory system reflects this adaptation. The blood contains a high concentration of hemocyanin, a copper-based molecule that binds oxygen more efficiently at low concentrations than the iron-based hemoglobin found in many other animals. This allows the squid to extract what little oxygen is available, maintaining its cellular functions even when supply is limited. Movement remains gentle and continuous, often involving small adjustments of its fins, which extend from the sides of its mantle. These fins provide a steady propulsion that requires little energy, allowing the animal to remain suspended within its preferred depth. There is no need for rapid escape or pursuit. Instead, it maintains a position within a layer where few predators are active. Feeding follows a similarly restrained pattern. Rather than hunting actively, the vampire squid collects organic debris drifting through the water, a mixture of fine particles that includes fragments of dead organisms, microscopic life, and other material descending from above. Using specialized filaments, it gathers this material, drawing it inward and forming it into consumable portions. This method avoids the need for high-energy pursuit, aligning with the limited oxygen available. Defense relies on subtlety rather than confrontation. When disturbed, it can invert its webbed arms, enveloping its body in a protective posture that conceals more vulnerable areas. The tips of its arms carry small, light-producing organs that can emit brief flashes, creating a momentary distraction. It may also release a cloud of bioluminescent particles, forming a drifting display that shifts attention away from its actual position. These responses are measured, used only when necessary, preserving energy for continued survival. The animal does not rely on repeated escape attempts or prolonged activity. It returns quickly to stillness, maintaining its place within the low oxygen layer. Its existence redefines the expectations of what can persist under such constraints. The absence of oxygen does not eliminate life, but reshapes it into forms that require less, that move less, and that endure through efficiency. The vampire squid remains within this narrow balance, its structure, behavior, and chemistry aligned with conditions that limit most others. In its quiet drift, it occupies a space where activity gives way to persistence, where survival depends not on speed or strength, but on a steady alignment with scarcity itself. Size shifts quietly in the deep, not through sudden transformation, but through a gradual stretching of proportions that would seem unusual closer to the surface. Forms that resemble small, familiar creatures begin to appear larger, their outlines expanded, their presence more substantial, as if the environment itself has allowed them to grow beyond expected limits. Among these are the giant amphipods, crustaceans related to the small, shrimp-like species found in shallower waters. Their bodies retain the same general structure, segmented and curved, with multiple legs arranged along the underside and antennae extending forward to sense their surroundings. Yet at these depths, their scale increases, reaching lengths that contrast sharply with their smaller relatives. Their exoskeletons remain flexible, not heavily armored, allowing them to move with a steady, deliberate motion across the seafloor. The body arches slightly, its segments overlapping in a way that provides both protection and mobility. Each limb contributes to a continuous crawling movement, carrying the animal across the sediment in search of what the environment provides. Food does not appear here in steady supply. It arrives intermittently, descending from above in the form of organic material, fragments of distant ecosystems, remains of larger organisms, and fine particles settle slowly onto the seafloor. This falling material, often called marine snow, accumulates in thin layers, creating a dispersed source of nourishment. The giant amphipod responds to this pattern as a scavenger. Its sensory structures detect chemical traces within the water, guiding it toward areas where material has gathered. When it encounters a suitable source, it feeds steadily, using specialized mouthparts to break down what it finds. There is no urgency in its behavior, only a consistent engagement with what is available. Occasionally, larger falls occur, the remains of a fish or another animal reaching the seafloor intact. In such moments, multiple amphipods may gather, their movements becoming more concentrated as they share the resource. Even then, the activity remains controlled, shaped by the need to conserve energy rather than expend it rapidly. The increase in size observed in these organisms reflects a broader pattern known as deep-sea gigantism. In certain groups, individuals grow larger at greater depths, a trend influenced by several overlapping factors. Lower temperatures, slow metabolic rates, allowing energy to be used more efficiently over longer periods. Reduced predation pressure means fewer threats that would otherwise limit growth. At the same time, the sporadic nature of food availability favors organisms that can store energy and endure extended intervals between feeding events. Larger bodies support this endurance. They can hold greater reserves, sustain longer periods without nourishment, and process substantial amounts of food when it becomes available. Growth occurs gradually, shaped by conditions that do not demand rapid development, but instead favor persistence over time. The structure of the giant amphipod reflects these pressures. Its internal systems operate at a pace aligned with its environment, neither accelerated nor diminished beyond what is necessary. Each movement, each feeding event, each stage of growth fits within a rhythm defined by scarcity and patience. Its presence along the seafloor contributes to a larger process. By consuming and breaking down organic material, it participates in the gradual recycling of nutrients, returning them to forms that can be used by other organisms. This role, though quiet, supports the continuity of life within a system where resources must be used fully. In this way, the expansion of size is not an excess, but a response. The giant amphipod grows not to dominate, but to align with the demands of its surroundings, becoming a form that carries the capacity to endure within a landscape where consistency is rare and time extends without interruption. Stillness becomes a strategy here, not an absence of life, but a deliberate state shaped by necessity. Movement, which defines so much of life closer to the surface, recedes into something far less frequent, almost optional. Bodies remain poised within the water or resting against the seafloor, their presence sustained without the constant need to travel. In this environment, energy is not easily replaced. Each motion carries a cost, and that cost cannot be recovered quickly. As a result, many organisms adopt a pattern that favors minimal activity, allowing long periods to pass with little visible change. They do not wander widely or pursue distant opportunities. Instead, they remain within a limited space, adjusting only when conditions require it. Muscles contract slowly, sometimes so gradually that movement becomes difficult to perceive. A slight shift in position, a gentle extension of a limb, these actions unfold over extended intervals, blending into the surrounding stillness. The boundary between motion and rest becomes less distinct, as both exist within the same measured pace. Metabolism aligns with this pattern. Internal processes proceed at reduced rates, conserving resources and extending the time between necessary intake of food. Oxygen consumption decreases, chemical reactions slow, and growth occurs over longer spans. This adjustment allows organisms to persist in a place where opportunities are rare and unpredictable. Food does not arrive on a schedule. It appears intermittently, carried downward or drifting across the seafloor in uneven distributions. For those that barely move, the strategy is not to seek it actively, but to wait within a position where chance encounters are possible. The environment itself becomes part of the feeding process, bringing small particles or organisms within reach over time. Some species extend appendages into the water, holding them steady as passive collectors. Others maintain open structures that can capture drifting material without requiring pursuit. When food arrives, it is gathered with minimal effort, processed slowly, and used efficiently. Between these events, long periods pass without visible feeding, sustained by the reserves accumulated earlier. This way of life introduces a different sense of time. Days, as defined by cycles of light above, hold no meaning here. Instead, time is measured by intervals between movements, by the gradual progression of internal processes, by the slow accumulation of energy and its careful use. Activity is not continuous, but episodic, emerging only when conditions align. Predation follows similar patterns. Some organisms rely on remaining unnoticed, their stillness reducing the likelihood of detection. Others wait in positions where potential prey may pass within reach, requiring only a brief controlled action to capture it. In both cases, success depends on patience rather than speed. The body structures of these creatures reflect their reduced activity. Musculature may be less developed, while tissues emphasize efficiency over strength. Sensory systems remain attuned to subtle changes, allowing the organism to respond when necessary, but not demanding constant input. Each aspect of their design supports a life that unfolds slowly. Within this quiet framework, survival is maintained not through dominance or rapid adaptation, but through alignment with the limited flow of resources. The absence of frequent movement does not indicate inactivity, but a continuous balance between conservation and response. They remain present, holding their place within the environment, adjusting only when required, existing within a rhythm that stretches far beyond the patterns familiar above. They move like patterns rather than bodies, unfolding through the water in slow, repeating sequences that feel continuous and unbroken. There is no clear boundary between the organism and the space it passes through, only a shifting arrangement of form that advances with quiet regularity. Among these are comb jellies and siphonophores, groups that share a reliance on softness and coordination rather than strength. Their structures appear delicate, composed of transparent or lightly colored tissues that hold together through subtle internal organization. At first glance, they seem too fragile to persist in such an environment, yet their design aligns closely with the conditions around them. Comb jellies propel themselves through rows of tiny hair-like structures called cilia, arranged in bands along their bodies. These cilia beat in coordinated waves, producing a steady forward motion that requires little energy. As they move, the cilia catch and scatter available light, creating shifting patterns that resemble faint, moving rainbows. The effect is not a direct emission of light, but a refraction, a quiet interaction between structure and the limited illumination that reaches them. Siphonophores follow a different path, existing not as single individuals in the usual sense, but as colonies of specialized units working together. Each unit performs a specific function, some focused on movement, others on feeding, others on reproduction. Together, they form a continuous body that can extend over significant distances, drifting through the water with a coordinated grace that appears seamless. Their movement often relies on pulsing contractions, gentle compressions that travel through their forms and push them forward. The pulses are slow and regular, creating a rhythm that defines their presence. There is no sudden acceleration, no abrupt change, only a steady progression that carries them through the surrounding water. Light plays a role in both groups, though in different ways. Some comb jellies produce bioluminescent flashes when disturbed, brief signals that ripple along their bodies in coordinated waves. These displays can travel from one end to the other, forming lines of light that appear and fade in sequence. The effect is subtle, yet structured, reflecting the underlying organization of their ciliary rows. Siphonophores also generate light, often through specialized cells distributed along their length. In certain species, this light can be emitted in patterns that correspond to the arrangement of their individual units, creating a series of points that illuminate and dim in response to external stimuli. These displays may serve to deter potential threats or to attract smaller organisms, integrating light into their overall function. Despite their delicate appearance, these creatures maintain an effectiveness that comes from their simplicity. Their bodies contain few rigid elements, allowing them to withstand the pressure of their environment without structural failure. There are no internal air spaces to compress, no heavy components to resist the surrounding force. Instead, their forms yield slightly, maintaining integrity through flexibility. Feeding occurs through contact rather than pursuit. Comb jellies use sticky cells to capture small organisms that pass within reach, drawing them inward with minimal motion. Siphonophores extend specialized tentacles equipped with stinging cells, intercepting prey that drifts too close. In both cases, the strategy relies on positioning and patience rather than active hunting. Their existence reflects a different approach to survival, one that favors coordination, efficiency, and alignment with the environment. They do not impose themselves upon their surroundings, but move within them, their forms shaped by the same conditions that support them. Within this quiet arrangement, their pulsing continues, their structures holding together in a balance that allows them to persist, appearing fragile, yet remaining complete. Structure changes meaning at depth, becoming less about rigidity and more about continuity. What appears strong in one environment becomes vulnerable in another, while forms that seem delicate take on a quiet resilience. Here, survival depends not on resisting force, but on allowing it to pass through without disruption. Many deep-sea organisms are built without the features that would fail under pressure. There are no rigid cavities filled with gas, no hollow chambers that would compress or collapse as depth increases. Instead, their bodies are composed largely of water and flexible tissues, creating an internal balance that matches the density of the surrounding environment. In this alignment, pressure does not act as a crushing force, but as a constant condition that is evenly distributed. Softness becomes a form of stability. Without hard edges or brittle components, there are no points of concentrated stress. The entire structure yields slightly, absorbing and redistributing the force that surrounds it. This flexibility prevents fractures, deformations, and the sudden failures that would occur in more rigid forms. At the cellular level, adaptation continues in ways that remain unseen. Membranes, proteins, and enzymes adjust to maintain their function under compression. Lipid layers within cell membranes incorporate molecules that preserve fluidity, preventing them from becoming too rigid. Proteins retain their shape through chemical balances that counteract the effects of pressure, ensuring that essential reactions can continue. Water itself plays a central role in this resilience. Because these organisms are composed primarily of it, there is little difference between the inside and the outside. Pressure acts uniformly, encountering no significant gradients that would distort internal structures. This continuity removes the need for protective barriers designed to resist compression. Movement reflects this same principle. Bodies bend and shift with ease, their forms adapting moment by moment to the currents and subtle forces around them. There is no need for rigid frameworks to maintain shape. Instead, structure is maintained through gentle tension and the natural cohesion of soft materials. This approach contrasts sharply with life closer to the surface, where strength is often associated with hardness and resistance. In the deep, those qualities can become liabilities. A rigid shell or a firm internal cavity may hold under moderate conditions, but at extreme depths, even small imperfections can lead to failure. Flexibility, by comparison, removes the conditions that lead to such weaknesses. The absence of air spaces is particularly significant. Gas compresses under pressure, changing volume dramatically as depth increases. Organisms that rely on gas-filled structures for buoyancy or function must either reinforce those spaces or abandon them entirely. Many deep-sea species follow the latter path, replacing gas with fluids or reducing such structures altogether, eliminating a major source of vulnerability. Even skeletal elements, when present, tend to be reduced or modified. Bones may be less dense, offering support without creating rigid points that could fracture. In some cases, they are nearly absent, replaced by connective tissues that provide shape while remaining adaptable. The result is a form of strength that does not rely on resisting the environment, but on integrating with it. These organisms do not oppose the pressure that surrounds them. They exist within it, their structures designed to function under conditions that remain constant and unyielding. What appears fragile from a distance reveals a different quality upon closer observation. Soft tissues hold together with quiet precision, maintaining form without rigidity, allowing movement without strain. There is no visible sign of the immense forces at work, only the continued presence of bodies that persist without collapse. In this context, fragility becomes a surface impression, while the underlying design reflects a deeper resilience, one that aligns completely with the conditions that define this depth. Food arrives here without ceremony, not as a continuous supply, but as a slow and uneven descent from far above. It does not fall in visible streams or gather in predictable places. Instead, it appears as scattered traces, a fine and constant drift that settles through the water column over long spans of time. This material, often called marine snow, consists of fragments from distant layers, microscopic remains, organic particles, and the slow breakdown of larger forms. It moves downward gradually, carried by subtle currents, dispersing as it descends. By the time it reaches the depths, it has become sparse, a faint accumulation that spreads thinly across the seafloor or lingers suspended in the water. For many organisms, this drifting material forms the foundation of survival. They do not search widely for food, but position themselves where such particles may pass within reach. Some extend delicate structures into the water, allowing the particles to settle against them. Others maintain open surfaces that capture what drifts by, collecting it over time until enough has accumulated to be consumed. Feeding, in this context, becomes a continuous but subtle process. There is no clear beginning or end, only a gradual intake that aligns with the slow arrival of material. Each particle contributes to a larger balance, providing energy in increments rather than in concentrated events. At times, larger sources of nourishment descend. The remains of organisms from higher layers reach the seafloor intact, forming localized concentrations of organic matter. These occurrences are infrequent, But when they happen, they draw the attention of multiple species. Movement increases slightly, bodies gathering around the source, each individual feeding within the limits of its own capacity. In such moments, opportunistic feeding becomes essential. Organisms that can respond quickly to these rare events gain access to a more substantial supply of energy. Some are capable of consuming large amounts in a short period, storing what they cannot immediately use. This ability to shift from scarcity to temporary abundance supports survival over longer intervals. Expandable stomachs play a significant role in this process. Certain species possess digestive systems that can stretch beyond their usual size, allowing them to take in prey or organic material larger than what their bodies might suggest. This expansion does not occur frequently, but when it does, it provides a way to store energy that may not become available again for extended periods. Once consumed, this energy is used slowly. Digestion proceeds at a measured pace, breaking down material over time and releasing nutrients gradually. This extended process aligns with the overall rhythm of life at these depths, where rapid change is uncommon and continuity depends on careful management of resources. Between these feeding events, long periods pass without intake. Organisms rely on stored energy, maintaining their internal processes at reduced levels. Movement decreases further, conserving what remains until another opportunity arises. There is no urgency in this waiting, only a steady continuation of existence supported by reserves accumulated earlier. The absence of consistent food sources shapes behavior in ways that differ from more abundant environments. There is no constant search, no reliance on frequent success. Instead, survival depends on patience, on the ability to endure intervals of scarcity without disruption. Within this system, each organism becomes part of a larger cycle. Material descends, is consumed, and is gradually returned to forms that can once again enter the flow. Nothing remains unused, and nothing arrives in excess. The process continues quietly, sustained by a balance between arrival and consumption, between scarcity and adaptation, allowing life to persist where food is never guaranteed, yet never entirely absent. Some bodies are shaped around a single possibility, not what is likely, but what might happen once after a long interval. Their proportions reflect an environment where opportunities are rare and cannot be measured in regular patterns. When food appears, it must be taken completely, regardless of its size. These creatures carry mouths that extend far beyond what their outer form suggests. Jaws hinge open with a flexibility that allows them to expand, creating an opening capable of enclosing prey that seems too large to manage. The head does not remain fixed in proportion to the body. It becomes a structure that can temporarily exceed it, adapting in the moment to accommodate what is encountered. Teeth, when present, are often slender and angled inward, forming a structure that guides prey deeper rather than resisting it. Once the initial capture occurs, retreat becomes difficult. The mouth closes gradually, not with force, but with persistence, ensuring that the captured form continues inward without escape. The body itself participates in this expansion. Tissues stretch, internal cavities widen, and the digestive system adjusts to contain what has been taken in. There is no immediate processing of such a meal. Instead, it is held within, occupying much of the available space, becoming a stored resource that will be used over an extended period. These adaptations emerge from the unpredictability of feeding opportunities. In this environment, smaller, frequent meals cannot be relied upon. Encounters with suitable prey may be separated by long intervals, making it necessary to secure as much energy as possible when a chance arises. A single large intake can sustain the organism through prolonged periods without further feeding. Digestion proceeds slowly, aligned with a reduced metabolic rate. Enzymatic processes break down the captured material over time, releasing nutrients gradually. This extended digestion prevents waste and ensures that each portion of the meal contributes to ongoing survival. Nothing is processed quickly, and nothing is lost without purpose. Movement leading to such encounters remains minimal. These organisms do not actively pursue large prey across distances. Instead, they position themselves within areas where movement from other species may bring potential food within reach. When contact occurs, the response is immediate, a brief action that captures what is available before it passes. The body design supports this approach. Flexible joints, expandable skin, and a digestive system capable of significant enlargement allow the organism to respond to opportunities that exceed its usual scale. There is no fixed limit imposed by its resting form. Instead, that form serves as a baseline, capable of temporary transformation when conditions require it. After feeding, activity decreases further. The organism returns to a state of reduced motion, conserving energy while digestion continues. The enlarged body gradually returns to its original proportions as the stored material is processed. This cycle repeats irregularly, shaped entirely by the timing of external events rather than any internal schedule. Survival within this system depends on readiness. The ability to expand, to capture, and to retain becomes more important than speed or frequency. Each successful feeding event carries the potential to sustain life over a long duration, making precision and capacity essential. Within this quiet pattern, these creatures persist, their bodies shaped by extremes that demand both restraint and sudden adaptation. They remain prepared for moments that may not come often, yet define the conditions of their existence when they do. Energy moves through this depth without passing through light. The pathways that sustain life here begin elsewhere, carried downward or drawn from sources that do not depend on the sun. The familiar sequence that links plants, herbivores, and predators gives way to a different arrangement, one that operates without a visible starting point. In the absence of sunlight, there are no plants performing photosynthesis, no leaves spread toward brightness, no microscopic algae forming the base of a sunlit food web. The process that converts light into chemical energy does not occur here, and with its absence, an entire structure of life is replaced by something less direct, yet equally continuous. Much of the energy that supports this system arrives from above, though not in its original form. Organic material produced in brighter layers sinks gradually, breaking apart as it descends. By the time it reaches these depths, it has become a dispersed resource, carried through the water and across the seafloor. Organisms intercepted in fragments, each piece representing energy that has traveled a long distance before being used again. Yet this is not the only source. In certain regions, energy emerges from the earth itself, released through chemical processes that operate independently of light. Substances such as hydrogen sulfide and methane rise from the seafloor, providing the basis for a different form of production. Specialized bacteria use these chemicals to generate energy, a process known as chemosynthesis, forming the foundation of localized ecosystems. Within these systems, the role of primary producers shifts from plants to microorganisms that thrive in conditions shaped by chemistry rather than illumination. They form dense communities around vents and seep sites, creating concentrations of life that contrast with the surrounding sparsity. Larger organisms depend on these bacteria, either by consuming them directly or by hosting them within their own bodies, forming close associations that allow energy to be shared. The structure of the food chain reflects these differences. Instead of a broad base of photosynthetic organisms, there are multiple entry points for energy, each limited in extent but capable of sustaining complex interactions. Some species rely on the steady descent of organic matter, while others depend on chemical sources emerging from below. These pathways intersect and overlap, forming a network rather than a single, unified chain. Feeding relationships adjust accordingly. Predators exist, but their interactions are shaped by the uneven distribution of resources. Scavengers play a significant role, recycling material that would otherwise remain unused. Microorganisms continue to break down organic matter, returning it to forms that can be reintroduced into the system. Each level contributes to a cycle that operates without the direct influence of sunlight. This arrangement produces a system that is both stable and constrained. Energy enters slowly and is used carefully, passing through multiple stages before dissipating. There is little excess, and each transfer is shaped by efficiency rather than abundance. Growth occurs, but at a pace that reflects the limited flow of resources. Time, in this context, extends beyond the patterns seen in surface environments. Without daily cycles of light and dark, activity does not follow a repeating schedule. Instead, processes unfold continuously, guided by availability rather than rhythm. The system persists through steady exchanges, maintaining balance without reliance on external variation. Life continues within this framework, sustained by pathways that operate quietly and without direct connection to the sun. The absence of light does not remove energy, but redirects it, shaping a structure that differs in form yet remains complete within its own conditions. From the seafloor, a different kind of flow rises, not of water alone, but of heat and dissolved minerals carried upward from within the earth. It does not spread evenly. It emerges in concentrated streams, forming columns that shimmer as they meet the surrounding cold. Around these openings, the environment changes, not gradually, but within a short distance, creating pockets where conditions shift in ways that allow unusual forms of life to gather. These are hydrothermal vents, places where seawater has moved deep into the crust, been heated by underlying rock, and returned enriched with chemicals. The fluid that emerges can reach high temperatures, yet it does not boil under the immense pressure of the surrounding ocean. Instead, it rises steadily, carrying compounds that become the foundation of localized ecosystems. Among the most recognizable inhabitants are tube worms, organisms that grow in clusters around these vents. Their bodies extend upward from protective tubes, forming dense groupings that sway gently in the surrounding currents. At their upper ends, soft structures known as plumes extend outward, often colored in deep reds, reflecting the presence of molecules adapted for transporting gases within their tissues. Unlike most animals, these tube worms do not possess a mouth or a digestive system in the traditional sense. They rely instead on a close internal association with bacteria that live within their bodies. These bacteria use the chemicals released from the vents, particularly hydrogen sulfide, to produce energy through chemosynthesis. The process converts chemical energy into organic compounds, forming a direct source of nourishment for the host. The relationship is continuous. The tube worm supplies the bacteria with access to both the chemical-rich vent fluids and the surrounding seawater, which provides oxygen. Specialized structures within the worm's body transport these substances inward, maintaining the conditions necessary for the bacteria to function. In return, the bacteria generate nutrients that sustain the worm, creating a self-contained system that does not depend on external feeding. Around these clusters, other organisms gather, forming a community shaped by the same chemical foundation. Crustaceans, mollusks, and various other species move through the area, some grazing on bacterial mats that develop on surfaces, others interacting more directly with the vent structures. Each species occupies a role within a network that centers on chemical energy rather than sunlight. Temperature gradients define the boundaries of this environment. Close to the vent openings, conditions can become too intense for many forms of life. A short distance away, the heat dissipates, creating zones where organisms can maintain their internal balance. Within this narrow range, life concentrates, forming dense assemblages that contrast with the surrounding seafloor. The water here carries dissolved minerals that precipitate upon contact with the colder ocean, forming chimney-like structures that rise from the seabed. These formations grow over time, shaped by the continuous flow of vent fluids. Their surfaces provide additional space for organisms to attach and develop, expanding the available habitat within the vent field. Despite the intensity of the conditions, stability exists within these systems. The flow of chemicals continues, the temperature gradients remain consistent, and the biological communities persist as long as the vents remain active. When a vent ceases to function, the surrounding life gradually disperses or declines, shifting to other areas where conditions remain suitable. In this setting, life does not depend on light, nor on the slow descent of material from above. It is built directly upon the energy released from within the planet, forming a system that operates independently of the surface world. The organisms that inhabit these vents align themselves with this energy, their structures and relationships shaped by the chemical environment that surrounds them. Within the rising plumes and mineral structures, a distinct form of existence continues, defined by heat, chemistry, and the quiet persistence of organisms adapted to conditions that remain far removed from those above. Not all activity at depth rises in heat or motion. In some places, the seafloor releases its contents slowly, almost imperceptibly, allowing chemical compounds to seep into the surrounding water over long periods of time. These releases do not form towering structures or visible plumes. They remain low, steady, and quiet, shaping the environment without drawing attention to themselves. These areas are known as cold seeps, regions where methane and other hydrocarbons escape from beneath the ocean floor. The fluids that emerge are not heated in the same way as those from hydrothermal vents. They carry no sudden warmth, no visible turbulence, only a gradual flow that continues over extended spans, sometimes lasting for thousands of years. Within this slow release, a different kind of ecosystem forms, one built around chemical energy rather than sunlight. Methane becomes the central resource, supporting communities of microorganisms that can process it through metabolic pathways suited to these conditions. These microbes convert chemical compounds into usable energy, forming the foundation upon which larger organisms depend. The seafloor in these regions often changes in appearance. Layers of white or pale material accumulate, produced by bacterial activity and chemical reactions between methane and seawater. Hard carbonate structures may develop over time, creating uneven surfaces that provide anchoring points for other life forms. These formations grow gradually, shaped by processes that unfold at a pace aligned with the seep itself. Among the inhabitants are organisms that maintain close associations with these microorganisms. Certain species of clams and mussels host methane processing bacteria within their tissues, allowing them to draw nourishment directly from the chemical environment. Their bodies become sites of exchange, where internal processes mirror those occurring in the surrounding sediment. Other species move across the seafloor, interacting with bacterial mats that form in patches. Crustaceans, worms, and various invertebrates feed within these areas, each contributing to the circulation of nutrients. The community does not rely on rapid growth or frequent turnover. Instead, it persists through continuity, with individuals often living longer and developing more slowly than their counterparts in more dynamic environments. Stability defines these ecosystems. While hydrothermal vents may shift or cease over shorter timescales, cold seeps tend to remain active for much longer periods. The steady release of methane provides a consistent energy source, allowing communities to establish and maintain themselves without sudden disruption. This stability shapes the behavior and structure of the organisms that live there, favoring endurance over rapid adaptation. Movement within these habitats remains measured. Organisms do not need to travel far to access resources, as the chemical processes occur directly beneath or around them. The environment supports a localized existence where life remains concentrated within specific areas, separated by stretches of seafloor that lack similar conditions. These communities often remain hidden, not only because of their depth, but because their activity does not produce obvious signals. There are no large-scale visual markers that reveal their presence from a distance. Only close observation reveals the subtle changes in texture, the faint accumulations, and the organisms that inhabit them. Within this quiet setting, life unfolds through processes that rely on consistency rather than intensity. Methane continues to rise, microbes continue to transform it, and larger organisms continue to depend on those transformations. Each part of the system connects to the next, forming a cycle that operates without interruption. The result is a habitat defined not by sudden events, but by gradual persistence, where energy flows steadily and life adapts to a rhythm that remains constant over long spans of time. There are forms that do not choose a direction, only a position within the water, allowing movement to be decided by currents rather than intention. Their bodies remain suspended, carried gently through the surrounding space, neither anchored nor actively propelled, existing within a flow that continues without pause. These drifting creatures rely on buoyancy rather than motion. Their tissues are adjusted to match the density of the water around them, creating a balance that prevents sinking or rising too quickly. Some contain gelatinous structures that hold a high proportion of water, reducing their weight difference from the environment. Others incorporate subtle variations in internal composition, allowing fine control over their position without the need for constant effort. In this state, movement becomes passive. Instead of swimming through the water, they move with it, following currents that shift gradually over time. Their paths are not fixed, but shaped by the surrounding conditions, carrying them across distances without the expenditure of significant energy. The direction may change, but the process remains continuous, guided by forces external to the organism. Minimal movement does not mean absence of control. Small adjustments occur through slight contractions or the extension of delicate structures, allowing the organism to maintain its orientation or remain within a preferred layer. These changes are subtle, often barely perceptible, yet they provide enough influence to keep the body aligned with favorable conditions. Energy efficiency defines this way of life. By reducing the need for active propulsion, these organisms conserve the limited resources available to them. Metabolic rates remain low, and internal processes proceed at a pace that matches the slow movement of the surrounding water. Each action is measured, each adjustment serving a specific purpose without excess. Feeding follows the same principle of passivity. Rather than pursuing prey, these creatures allow it to come within reach. Tentacles, filaments, or extended surfaces intercept small organisms and particles carried by the current. Contact becomes the trigger for capture, with specialized cells or structures ensuring that once prey is encountered, it is retained. Some employ sticky surfaces that hold passing material, while others use fine sensory mechanisms to detect even slight disturbances, responding with a controlled motion that secures what has drifted close. The process does not require speed, only readiness, a continuous presence within the flow where encounters may occur. This approach reduces the need for constant searching. Instead of expending energy to locate food, the organism remains within an environment that delivers it intermittently. The success of this strategy depends on positioning, on remaining within layers where currents carry sufficient material to sustain life over time. Reproduction and growth align with this pattern as well. Without the need for rapid movement or territorial behavior, individuals can exist within overlapping spaces, their interactions shaped by proximity rather than pursuit. Life cycles unfold gradually, integrated into the same slow progression that defines their movement. The absence of active swimming changes the relationship between the organism and its environment. Rather than moving through a fixed space, the organism becomes part of a moving system, its position relative rather than absolute. The water carries it, supports it, and provides the conditions necessary for its continued existence. Within this arrangement, drifting becomes not a limitation, but a stable form of survival. The body remains suspended, the current continues, and life persists within a motion that requires almost no effort at all. Growth unfolds differently in these depths, not driven by rapid accumulation, but by a slow extension over time. Bodies expand gradually, adding to themselves in increments that reflect an environment where urgency is rare and continuity takes precedence over speed. Size, in this context, becomes a result of duration as much as of form. This pattern, often described as deep-sea gigantism, appears across multiple groups. Organisms that remain small in shallower regions reach larger proportions here, their structures extended without altering their fundamental design. The change does not occur abruptly. It emerges through long developmental periods, shaped by conditions that favor persistence over rapid cycles. Temperature plays a quiet role in this process. The surrounding water remains cold and stable, slowing metabolic activity within the body. Chemical reactions proceed at reduced rates, and growth unfolds over extended spans. Energy is not used quickly, and as a result, it can be directed toward gradual development rather than immediate maintenance. The organism continues to grow slowly, without the interruptions that might occur in more variable environments. Metabolism aligns with this steady pace. With lower energy demands, the body does not require frequent intake to sustain itself. Resources gathered from occasional feeding events can be distributed over longer periods, supporting both survival and growth. This balance allows size to increase without the need for constant replenishment. Predation pressure also shifts. In many deep-sea habitats, the number of active predators is reduced, not entirely absent, but less concentrated than in more productive regions. This change alters the constraints on growth. Smaller size often provides advantages in avoiding detection or escaping pursuit, but where such pressures are less intense, those constraints loosen. Organisms can continue to grow without facing the same level of risk. Larger bodies offer certain advantages within this framework. They can store greater reserves of energy, allowing survival through extended intervals between feeding opportunities. They can also maintain internal stability more effectively, buffering against minor fluctuations in their environment. These benefits reinforce the tendency toward increased size, creating a feedback that supports continued growth. Lifespan extends alongside this process. With slower metabolism and reduced external threats, many deep-sea organisms live longer than their counterparts in shallower waters. Time becomes an available resource, allowing development to proceed without the need for rapid completion. Each stage of growth is prolonged, and the final size reflects this extended timeline. The structure of the body adapts to accommodate this scale. Support systems adjust, maintaining function without requiring excessive density or rigidity. Movement remains measured, aligned with the overall pace of life at depth. Larger size does not lead to increased activity. Instead, it integrates into the same pattern of conservation and efficiency. Reproductive strategies may also shift, with longer intervals between reproductive events and greater investment in each one. The extended lifespan provides multiple opportunities over time, reducing the need for rapid or frequent reproduction. This approach aligns with the broader pattern of slow, sustained existence. Within this environment, size becomes a reflection of stability rather than competition. It is not achieved through rapid expansion or dominance, but through a continuous process that unfolds without interruption. Each increment of growth builds upon the last, guided by conditions that remain consistent over long periods. The result is a range of organisms whose scale exceeds what might be expected, not through sudden change, but through the quiet accumulation of time, energy, and adaptation within a system that allows such growth to continue. Encounters are not guaranteed here. Space extends in every direction, and individuals may pass through long spans of time without crossing paths with others of their kind. Reproduction, within this setting, cannot rely on frequent contact. It must adapt to distance, to uncertainty, and to the quiet separation that defines the environment. Many species exist in low densities, scattered across vast areas of seafloor or suspended within open water. The likelihood of two individuals meeting at the right moment becomes small, shaping behaviors and biological systems that account for this rarity. When contact does occur, it carries a significance that extends beyond the immediate interaction. Some organisms rely on chemical signals that drift through the water, subtle traces that indicate presence. These signals do not travel indefinitely, but they extend far enough to increase the chance of detection within a limited range. An individual encountering such a signal may adjust its movement, not rapidly, but with enough direction to bring it closer to another. In other cases, reproduction does not require simultaneous presence. Certain species release eggs and sperm into the surrounding water, allowing fertilization to occur externally. This method spreads reproductive material across a wider area, increasing the probability that some will meet under the right conditions. The process remains uncertain, yet it aligns with the dispersed nature of the population. More specialized strategies also appear. In some deep-sea fish, the difference between males and females becomes pronounced. Males may be significantly smaller, their primary function centered on locating a mate. Once found, the male attaches to the female's body, forming a permanent connection. Over time, tissues merge, and the male becomes a continuous source of reproductive cells, ensuring that fertilization can occur without the need for future encounters. Other organisms maintain the ability to store reproductive material after a single meeting. This allows them to produce offspring long after the initial contact, extending the impact of a rare encounter across time. In this way, a single event can support multiple cycles of reproduction, reducing the dependence on repeated interactions. Life cycles unfold slowly, reflecting the broader pace of the environment. Development from egg to adult may take extended periods, with growth proceeding in alignment with limited resources and stable conditions. There are no rapid transitions or frequent generations. Instead, each stage is prolonged, allowing the organism to reach maturity within a framework that emphasizes endurance. Parental investment varies, but in many cases, fewer offspring are produced, each with a higher chance of survival. Eggs may be larger, containing more resources to support early development. Some are placed in protected areas, while others remain within the parent's body until they are more fully formed. These strategies reduce vulnerability during early stages, increasing the likelihood that each offspring will persist. Isolation shapes not only how reproduction occurs, but also how species maintain continuity over time. Genetic exchange may happen infrequently, yet it remains sufficient to sustain populations that are adapted to their specific conditions. Variation continues, though at a pace that mirrors the slow unfolding of life at depth. Within this system, reproduction becomes less about frequency and more about timing, adaptation, and efficiency. Each strategy reflects a response to distance and scarcity, ensuring that life can continue even when encounters are rare. Across the seafloor and through the water column, these processes persist quietly, linking individuals across time rather than through constant proximity, allowing existence to continue within a landscape defined by separation. The ground here extends without clear boundary, a surface that appears uniform at first, yet carries subtle variations that only become visible with time and careful observation. It does not rise into dramatic forms or shift with constant motion. Instead, it lies in broad stretches composed of fine sediments that have settled slowly over long periods. These mud plains form from particles descending through the water, accumulating layer by layer. Each fragment arrives from elsewhere, contributing to a surface that reflects distant processes rather than local activity. The result is a landscape that feels continuous, its texture soft and yielding, marked only by faint disturbances where something has passed or settled. Movement across this terrain remains minimal. There are no sweeping currents reshaping the ground, no frequent disturbances that alter its structure. The surface retains impressions for extended periods, shallow tracks or slight indentations that persist before gradually blending back into the surrounding sediment. Time unfolds quietly here, without sudden change. Life exists within this stillness, though it does not gather densely. Organisms appear scattered, separated by distances that reflect the limited availability of resources. A single individual may occupy a space that extends far beyond its immediate surroundings, its presence defined more by isolation than by proximity to others. Some remain partially embedded within the sediment, their bodies extending just above the surface, interacting with the thin layer where water and ground meet. Others move slowly across the plain, leaving behind subtle traces that mark their passage. These movements are infrequent, shaped by the need to conserve energy rather than to explore widely. The distribution of life reflects the uneven arrival of organic material. Certain areas receive slightly more input, creating localized zones where organisms may be found in greater numbers. Beyond these areas, the landscape becomes more sparse, with long stretches where visible life is absent or difficult to detect. Sound travels differently here, carrying through the water without the interruptions found in more complex environments. The absence of frequent movement and the uniformity of the terrain create a setting where vibrations move steadily, yet without distinct sources. The environment remains responsive, though not actively engaged. Above the seafloor, the water column continues, but its influence on the ground remains limited. There are no shifting shadows, no variations in light to define the passage of time. The surface below exists in a state that remains consistent, shaped by processes that operate over extended durations. Structures do appear, though they are subtle. Small mounds form where organisms interact with the sediment, while depressions mark areas where material has been displaced. These features do not dominate the landscape. They exist as minor variations within a broader uniformity, adding detail without altering the overall continuity. In certain regions, larger formations may interrupt the plane, rising slightly above the surrounding surface. These features provide points of contrast, yet they remain part of the same quiet system, integrated into the slow processes that define the environment. The vastness of this landscape extends beyond immediate perception. Without clear landmarks or boundaries, distance becomes difficult to measure. Each direction appears similar, each section reflecting the same gradual accumulation and stillness. Within this setting, life persists not through density or rapid interaction, but through quiet continuity. Organisms maintain their presence within the spaces available to them, adapting to a terrain that offers little variation and requires little change. The seafloor remains broad and undisturbed, holding the traces of movement and the patterns of life that unfold across it, each one integrated into a landscape defined by stillness and time. Perception shifts away from vision here, settling into a medium that travels without interruption. Sound moves through water with a steadiness that light cannot match at these depths, carrying information across distances where other signals fade. It does not require brightness or contrast. It moves through pressure and density, extending outward in all directions. Vibrations pass through the water as continuous waves, spreading far beyond their source. A movement, a contact, a subtle shift in the environment. Each creates a disturbance that travels outward, gradually diminishing, but often reaching farther than expected. In this way, presence is not defined by visibility, but by the patterns these waves create as they move. Many organisms have developed ways to detect these patterns with precision. Sensory structures respond to minute changes in pressure, allowing them to interpret the direction and intensity of a passing vibration. These signals provide a form of awareness that does not rely on light, offering a consistent means of interacting with the surrounding environment. For some species, this sensitivity extends along the length of the body. Specialized cells align in sequences that register changes in the water, translating movement into a form of perception. A distant disturbance becomes a detectable event, carrying information about its origin without the need for direct contact. Communication also adapts to this medium. Certain organisms produce sounds or vibrations intentionally, releasing signals that travel outward and may be received by others of the same species. These signals can vary in frequency and duration, forming patterns that convey specific information. They do not create noise in the familiar sense, but rather structured disturbances that move through the water with purpose. The range of such communication depends on the strength of the signal and the sensitivity of the receiver. In some cases, it allows individuals to maintain awareness of each other across distances that would otherwise separate them completely. The exchange remains subtle, occurring within a medium that supports it naturally. Predation and avoidance are also influenced by sound. A moving organism creates disturbances that can reveal its position even in complete darkness. Those capable of detecting these signals gain an advantage, identifying potential prey or recognizing the approach of something larger. Movement becomes both a necessity and a source of exposure, requiring careful balance. Stillness, in this context, reduces detectable signals. By minimizing motion, an organism limits the vibrations it produces, becoming less noticeable within the surrounding water. This approach complements other strategies, allowing presence without drawing attention through sound. The environment itself contributes to this system. With fewer obstacles and less variation in structure, sound travels with fewer interruptions. The water acts as a continuous medium, allowing signals to propagate over long distances. At the same time, the absence of frequent activity prevents constant background noise, preserving the clarity of individual disturbances. This creates a setting that may appear silent, yet remains filled with information. Each movement, each interaction, generates patterns that extend outward, forming a network of signals that overlap and intersect. The world is not quiet in an absolute sense, but organized in a way where sound carries meaning without excess. Within this framework, organisms navigate and interact without relying on sight. Their awareness emerges from the detection of motion through the water, from the interpretation of waves that pass through their bodies. Communication, feeding, and avoidance all connect to this system, integrating sound into the structure of daily existence. The result is an environment that responds continuously, shaped by vibrations that move through it, carrying traces of life across distances that remain unseen yet perceptible. Some records exist as brief interruptions in an otherwise continuous absence, moments where something appears once and then does not return. These observations are often limited to a single encounter, a short sequence of frames that capture a form moving through the field of view before it fades again into the surrounding depth. In these instances, the evidence remains incomplete. A shape passes across the image, its structure partially defined, its movement suggesting a pattern that cannot be followed beyond those few seconds. There is no opportunity to observe it from different angles, no extended record to reveal how it behaves over time. What remains is a fragment held within a narrow window of observation. Such creatures are sometimes recorded only once, their existence confirmed by that single encounter. The data may include depth, location, and environmental conditions, yet the organism itself resists full classification. Without repeated sightings, it becomes difficult to place it within known groups or to determine how it fits into the broader system of life at these depths. Limited footage contributes to this uncertainty. Cameras operate within constraints, their range defined by available light, positioning, and the duration of each descent. When an unfamiliar organism enters the frame, the recording captures only what occurs within that brief interval. The movement may be slow, yet the passage remains short, leaving gaps in understanding that cannot be filled immediately. Behavior, in particular, remains largely unknown. A single encounter does not reveal feeding patterns, reproductive strategies, or interactions with other species. It shows only a moment, detached from the sequence of events that would provide context. The organism's role within its environment remains implied rather than confirmed. Even physical details can be difficult to resolve. Soft structures may shift in ways that obscure clear outlines, while the surrounding water limits contrast. The result is an image that suggests form without fully defining it, leaving room for interpretation that may change with further study. Attempts to revisit these encounters do not always succeed. Subsequent expeditions may return to the same region without finding the organism again. The conditions that allowed the initial observation may not repeat, or the organism may occupy a range that extends beyond the area being observed. The depth remains vast, and coverage remains limited. This rarity does not necessarily indicate scarcity in the broader sense. An organism recorded once may exist in numbers that are simply distributed across a wide area, reducing the likelihood of repeated encounters. Its presence may be consistent, yet its detection remains infrequent due to the scale of its environment. Over time, patterns begin to emerge from multiple isolated observations. Different expeditions may record similar forms, each from separate locations, each providing another fragment of information. These fragments can be compared, revealing connections that were not visible from a single encounter. Gradually, a clearer picture may form, though it often remains incomplete. There are also forms that have yet to be recorded at all, existing beyond the reach of current observation. The depth extends further than the areas most frequently explored, and within that extension, the potential for undiscovered life remains significant. Each descent reveals only a small portion of what may be present. The rarest creatures, then, exist at the edge of observation, defined by the briefness of their appearances and the limits of available data. They remain part of the system, yet not fully integrated into current understanding. Within this quiet uncertainty, they persist, moving through regions where detection is unlikely, leaving behind only the occasional trace that suggests their presence without fully revealing it. Beyond the areas that have been observed, the seafloor continues without interruption, extending into regions that remain unvisited. The explored portions form only a small part of a much larger whole, a network of depths that have yet to be reached or recorded. Within this expanse, the absence of observation does not imply absence of life, but rather a lack of contact with it. Mapping efforts reveal the scale of what remains. Large sections of the ocean floor are still known only through indirect measurements, their contours outlined without detail, their surfaces unexamined. Each descent into these regions provides only a narrow view, a temporary presence within a space that continues far beyond the reach of the instruments. Within these unexplored areas, biodiversity is expected to extend beyond what has already been documented. The conditions vary subtly across distances, shaped by differences in geology, chemistry, and the slow movement of water. These variations create distinct habitats, each capable of supporting forms of life adapted to its specific characteristics. With each expedition, new species are recorded, often unlike those previously observed. Some resemble known groups, yet display features that distinguish them clearly. Others appear in forms that do not align easily with existing classifications, requiring further study to understand their relationships. These discoveries do not occur in large numbers at once, but they accumulate steadily, adding to a growing record that remains incomplete. The process of discovery unfolds gradually. A single expedition may capture images of organisms that have never been seen before, their structures and movements documented briefly before the mission concludes. Subsequent analysis examines these recordings, comparing them to known species, identifying differences, and determining whether they represent new forms of life. In many cases, confirmation requires repeated observation, yet such opportunities are limited. The conditions that allow a particular organism to be seen may not occur again within the same region. As a result, some discoveries remain provisional, recognized as distinct, but not fully understood. Technological limitations shape this process. Submersibles and remote vehicles operate within constraints of depth, duration, and coverage. Each mission must balance the need to explore new areas with the need to revisit known locations. The result is a pattern of observation that expands outward, slowly, leaving large portions of the environment unexamined. Despite these limitations, the accumulation of data suggests that the number of undiscovered species remains significant. Estimates vary, but they consistently indicate that a large proportion of deep-sea life has yet to be described. This is not due to a lack of presence, but to the scale of the environment and the challenges of accessing it. The concept of a frontier emerges from this combination of vastness and limited knowledge. The deep ocean represents a region where exploration continues, where each new observation adds to an understanding that remains incomplete. It is not a boundary in the traditional sense, but a space where discovery extends as far as effort and technology allow. Within this framework, the unknown persists alongside the known. Each recorded species becomes part of a larger context that includes many others still beyond observation. The environment holds more than what has been documented, its full diversity extending into areas that have not yet been reached. The process continues, each descent revealing a small portion of what exists, each return leaving behind a larger space still to be explored. Observation at these depths depends on extending presence through machines, sending instruments downward where direct access remains limited. The process begins at the surface, where vessels release submersibles or remotely operated vehicles, each designed to descend gradually through the water column, carrying light, cameras, and sensors into regions that cannot be reached by unaided means. Some of these systems are occupied, enclosing a small interior space where observers remain protected from the surrounding pressure. Thick materials form a barrier between the interior and the external environment, allowing a controlled descent while maintaining structural integrity. Windows, often small and carefully engineered, provide a direct view, though the field of vision remains narrow. More commonly, robotic vehicles undertake these descents. Connected to the surface by long cables or operating independently, they move through the water with controlled propulsion, guided by operators or programmed paths. Their movements are measured, adjusted continuously to maintain position and orientation within an environment that offers few visual references. Cameras mounted on these systems serve as the primary means of observation. Designed to function under high pressure and low temperatures, they capture images in conditions where natural light does not reach. Artificial illumination accompanies them, projecting beams outward to reveal the surrounding space. This light defines what can be seen, creating a limited window that moves with the vehicle. The field of view remains constrained. Beyond the reach of the light, the environment returns immediately to darkness, leaving large areas unobserved. As the vehicle moves, new sections come into view, while others disappear, forming a sequence of partial observations rather than a continuous picture. Filming within this setting presents multiple challenges. Pressure affects not only the structure of the vehicle, but also the performance of its components. Seals must remain intact, electronics must operate reliably, and all systems must withstand conditions that persist throughout the descent. Any failure can interrupt the mission, limiting the amount of data collected. Movement introduces additional complexity. The vehicle must maintain stability while navigating through the water, avoiding disturbances that could obscure visibility. Sediment can be lifted from the seafloor by slight contact or propulsion, clouding the camera's view and reducing clarity. Operators adjust movement carefully, balancing proximity with the need to preserve a clear image. Lighting itself alters the scene. While necessary for visibility, it can influence the behavior of organisms, causing them to move away or react in ways that differ from their natural state. The presence of the vehicle and its illumination becomes part of the environment during observation, shaping what is recorded. Duration remains limited. Each descent requires time, energy, and coordination, constraining how long the vehicle can remain at depth. Battery capacity, data storage, and operational considerations define the length of each mission. As a result, the amount of footage captured during a single expedition represents only a brief interval within a much larger, continuous environment. Footage remains rare not because life is absent, but because access is restricted. Each recording reflects a specific place and time, a narrow segment within an expansive system. Many areas are visited once or not at all, leaving gaps between observations that may extend across large distances. Despite these limitations, the images that are captured provide insight into a world that would otherwise remain unseen. Each frame contributes to a growing collection of observations, allowing patterns to emerge gradually as more data becomes available. The process continues, shaped by technology and the conditions it must navigate, extending observation into depths where direct presence remains beyond reach. What settles from above does not always belong to natural cycles. Alongside organic material, other fragments descend, carried through the same pathways that move particles downward. These fragments do not break down in the same way, and their presence introduces elements that were not part of this environment's original structure. Microplastics, small pieces formed from the breakdown of larger materials, have been detected at extreme depths. They arrive gradually, suspended within the water column, then settling onto the sea floor or remaining dispersed within the surrounding water. Their size allows them to move unnoticed, integrating into the same slow processes that carry other particles downward. These materials do not originate locally. They begin at the surface or along coastlines, entering the ocean through various pathways, then fragmenting over time. Currents distribute them across vast distances, eventually guiding some portion into deeper regions. The descent is not direct, but continuous, shaped by movement within the water and the gradual sinking of attached particles. Once present at depth, microplastics become part of the environment encountered by deep-sea organisms. Some are ingested, either directly or along with organic material that has settled around them. Their small size makes them difficult to distinguish from other particles, allowing them to enter feeding processes without immediate detection. Chemical interactions accompany their presence. Plastics can carry substances absorbed from the water above, transporting them downward along with the material itself. These compounds may be released gradually, interacting with the surrounding environment and potentially affecting organisms that come into contact with them. The accumulation of such materials remains uneven. Certain areas receive higher concentrations, influenced by currents, seafloor structure, and the distribution of descending particles. Other regions remain less affected, though the overall presence extends across wide portions of the ocean floor. This distribution introduces a human influence into a setting that had developed largely independent of direct interaction. The impact does not appear as a sudden change, but as a gradual addition integrated into existing processes in ways that are still being observed and understood. Long-term effects unfold slowly. The persistence of plastic materials means they remain within the environment for extended periods, continuing to interact with organisms and surrounding conditions. Their breakdown occurs over timescales that extend beyond immediate observation, making their influence cumulative rather than immediate. Research continues to examine how these materials move through deep-sea ecosystems. Some studies focus on ingestion and its effects on individual organisms, while others consider how plastics alter the distribution of chemical compounds or interact with microbial communities. Each observation adds to a developing understanding of how these introduced elements integrate into the system. The presence of microplastics at such depths reflects the connectivity of the ocean. Material introduced at one location can travel far from its origin, reaching areas that remain physically distant from human activity. The pathways that sustain life also carry these fragments, linking surface processes to the deepest parts of the ocean. Within this connection, the deep-sea environment remains largely unchanged in its structure, yet no longer entirely separate. The addition of these materials introduces a subtle shift, one that becomes part of the ongoing processes without immediately altering their outward appearance. The seafloor continues to receive what descends, incorporating both natural and introduced elements into its layers. Over time, these additions accumulate, forming part of a record that reflects not only natural cycles, but also the extended reach of human activity into depths that remain otherwise distant and rarely observed. Reaching these depths requires a careful balance between what is possible and what can endure the conditions encountered along the way. The descent itself is not a simple extension of surface travel, but a transition into an environment that imposes continuous demands on every system involved. Pressure remains one of the primary constraints. As depth increases, the force exerted on any structure rises steadily, pressing inward from all directions. Materials must be selected and shaped to withstand this constant compression without deforming or failing. Even small weaknesses can become points of failure, making precision in design essential. To address this, submersibles and instruments are constructed with reinforced structures, often using spherical shapes that distribute force evenly. These designs reduce stress concentrations, allowing the vehicle to maintain its integrity under extreme conditions. Despite these measures, the margin for error remains narrow, and each descent carries an inherent level of risk. Equipment limitations extend beyond structural concerns. Electronic systems must function reliably in low temperatures and high pressure, maintaining communication with the surface while processing data in real time. Signals transmitted through cables or acoustic methods can experience delays or interference, complicating control and observation. Mobility presents another challenge. Navigating through deep water requires careful control, as visibility remains limited and reference points are scarce. The vehicle must maintain orientation without relying on external landmarks, using internal systems to track position and movement. Small errors can lead to disorientation, making precise navigation difficult. Energy supply constrains the duration of each mission. Batteries or power systems must support propulsion, lighting, cameras, and sensors simultaneously, all within a limited capacity. As a result, time at depth is restricted, and each operation must be planned to maximize the information gathered within that window. The process of deployment and recovery adds further complexity. Launching a submersible involves coordination between crew, equipment, and environmental conditions at the surface. Weather, currents, and mechanical factors all influence the timing and success of the operation. Recovery requires equal care, ensuring that the vehicle returns safely after completing its mission. Cost remains a significant factor in limiting exploration. Designing, building, and maintaining deep-sea equipment requires specialized materials and expertise. Each mission involves logistical planning, vessel operation, and technical support, all contributing to the overall expense. These requirements restrict the number of expeditions that can be undertaken, concentrating efforts into specific periods and locations. Risk accompanies each stage of the process. Equipment failure at depth may result in the loss of valuable instruments, while challenges during deployment or recovery can affect both the mission and the crew involved. Even with careful planning, the environment introduces variables that cannot be fully controlled. As a result, missions remain limited in number and scope. Each descent represents a focused effort, targeting specific areas or questions rather than attempting broad coverage. The vastness of the ocean means that large regions remain unvisited, not due to lack of interest, but because of the constraints that define each operation. Despite these difficulties, exploration continues, guided by incremental progress. Improvements in materials, technology, and methods gradually expand the range of what can be achieved. Each mission contributes to a growing understanding, even as the environment retains much of its complexity. The challenge lies not only in reaching these depths, but in doing so consistently and safely, within limits that shape every aspect of the effort. There are systems that continue without reference to anything beyond themselves, unfolding over spans of time that extend far beyond recent presence. In these depths, life has persisted through conditions that have remained largely unchanged, developing along paths shaped by isolation rather than interaction. These ecosystems do not depend on external observation or intervention. Their processes began long before any attempt was made to reach them, and they continue regardless of whether they are seen. Each organism participates in a network of relationships that functions without awareness of anything beyond its immediate environment. Over millions of years, this separation has allowed evolution to proceed along trajectories distinct from those found in more connected regions. Adaptations emerge in response to local conditions, refined gradually through generations that experience little variation in their surroundings. The result is a collection of forms that reflect continuity rather than rapid change. Isolation influences not only physical traits, but also the structure of entire communities. Energy pathways, feeding relationships, and reproductive strategies develop within a closed framework, shaped by the resources available and the limitations imposed by depth. There is no influence from seasonal cycles, no direct connection to surface fluctuations. The system remains internally consistent. Time, in this context, accumulates differently. Without frequent disturbances, changes occur slowly, allowing stability to persist over long intervals. Organisms adapt to a narrow range of conditions, becoming highly specialized within their environment. This specialization does not limit survival, but reinforces it, aligning each species closely with the conditions it encounters. The absence of external influence does not mean absence of interaction. Within these ecosystems, organisms continue to affect one another, forming connections that sustain the system as a whole. Each interaction contributes to a balance that maintains continuity, even as individual organisms move, feed, and reproduce within their respective roles. Human presence, when it occurs, remains temporary and limited. Instruments descend, record, and return, leaving the environment largely unchanged. The duration of these encounters is brief compared to the timescales over which the system operates. Once observation ends, the processes continue as they did before, uninterrupted. This independence creates a hidden aspect of the planet, a portion of Earth that exists beyond direct experience. It is not separate in a physical sense, but in the way it operates, maintaining conditions that differ from those found at the surface. The connections between these regions remain indirect, mediated through slow exchanges of material and energy. Within this hidden framework, life evolves without reference to external changes that define other environments. The absence of light, the stability of temperature, and the consistency of pressure create a setting where variation occurs gradually, guided by internal dynamics rather than external events. Each organism reflects this history, carrying within its structure the result of long adaptation to a specific set of conditions. The forms observed today represent outcomes shaped by processes that have continued over extended periods, independent of recent influences. The system remains in motion, though not in a way that draws attention. Changes occur, but at a pace that aligns with the environment, maintaining a continuity that extends across generations. Life persists within this framework, defined by its own conditions, existing alongside the rest of the planet while remaining largely separate from it. Expectations formed at the surface tend to dissolve with depth, replaced not by absence, but by patterns that follow a different logic. What once seemed like a boundary reveals itself as a continuation, shaped by conditions that do not align with familiar assumptions. The deeper layers do not remove life, they reshape it, guiding it into forms that reflect their own quiet rules. Across these depths, existence persists without the elements that usually define it. There is no reliance on light to structure daily cycles, no steady supply of energy moving through visible pathways. Instead, life settles into systems that draw from subtle sources, aligning with chemical processes, drifting material, and long intervals between events. Each adaptation reflects a response not to abundance, but to limitation. Creatures here do not resemble the expectations carried downward. Their bodies yield where others would resist, expand where others would remain fixed, and reduce where others would require more. Movement becomes measured, sometimes nearly absent, while stillness itself becomes part of survival. Structures that appear delicate hold together under conditions that would seem to undo them, not through strength in the usual sense, but through alignment with the environment that surrounds them. The unfamiliarity increases with depth. Forms become less recognizable, behaviors less predictable, and relationships more subtle. What appears at one level may not extend to the next. Patterns shift, not abruptly, but gradually, as each layer introduces its own variations. The result is a progression that moves further from what is known, yet remains internally consistent within its own framework. Observation has revealed only portions of this system. Each descent captures fragments, brief glimpses that suggest a larger continuity beyond what is seen. Even with repeated efforts, the environment resists full understanding, not through concealment, but through scale. There is always more beyond the range of light, more beyond the duration of each encounter. Within this quiet distance, life continues without interruption. It does not depend on recognition or observation. It persists through cycles that extend beyond immediate perception, maintaining balance within conditions that remain steady over long spans. Each organism contributes to this balance, its role defined by the same constraints that shape its form. The deeper the exploration reaches, the more these patterns emerge, revealing a world that does not mirror the surface, but complements it through contrast. It is not an extension of familiar systems, but a parallel structure, complete in its own way, shaped by forces that operate without reference to light or rapid change. There is a sense of continuity that connects these depths to the rest of the planet, though it is not always visible. Material moves downward, energy shifts form, and life adapts accordingly, creating a link that remains indirect yet persistent. Within that connection, the deep ocean holds a complexity that unfolds slowly, revealing itself in parts rather than all at once. As each section of this environment comes into view, it adds to an understanding that remains incomplete, yet steadily expanding. The patterns observed do not resolve into a single explanation, but into a collection of processes that coexist, each contributing to a broader system that continues beyond the limits of observation. Among all these forms and movements, certain images may remain longer than others, quiet impressions that continue after the descent has ended. One of them may stay with you more clearly, a shape, a motion, or a presence that reflects this hidden world in its own way.